Well, welcome back to another analysis behind the news. You know, I want to talk a little bit more about how conservatives think, and I'm going to do it on the CONCON issue, if you will, or the Conference of States, whatever nomenclature they wish to put on it, where a number of people, delegates from around the country, meet and start to formulate amendments to the Constitution under Article 5 of the Constitution. Now, those of you who know the John Birch Society know that we've stayed the course for many decades. We've never deviated. We don't lie. We don't exaggerate. We've been proven truthful for many, many years. And yet today, there are a lot of people calling us liars, calling us all sorts of things, even a cult, if you can believe that, about what we are trying to do in relationship to stopping the call for a constitutional convention. Now, the people who are behind this, now we've talked about some of the liberals who want to do away with the Second Amendment as we understand it, and that sort of thing. But the conservatives who are behind this are experts in case law. Now, for those of you who know the difference between case law and the Constitution, this should be very disturbing, because they want to go in and amend the Constitution, and they're experts in case law. They've won cases on case law, not the Constitution itself. And so this is a problem, because a lot of this case law that's been built up is unconstitutional. One of the things that needs to be done relative to balancing a budget and getting back the balance of power within the government and closer to the people is to repeal the 16th and 17th Amendments. Now, the 16th Amendment set up the income tax. You could not have an income tax constitutionally before the 16th Amendment. It was done during the Civil War. It phased out, and it was tried again and found unconstitutional until the 16th Amendment was passed. And that was the direct tax on the people, the income tax. And that our forefathers knew would be a problem, because they knew that if the federal government could directly tax the individual, the federal government would have control over the individual. And see how they've been able to do that in relationship to some of these Tea Parties and other tax-deductible organizations. The 17th Amendment was the direct election of senators. They convinced the people at the time that we needed a change where the senators were no longer appointed or elected from the legislatures to represent the states. And somehow we needed to get it more democratic and go more towards democracy. You had a check and a balance within the National Congress between representatives of the people and representatives of the state. Today, both houses represent the people. Now, you can say, well, the Senate represents the states. Well, so does a representative under that definition. But the thing is that it was to be representatives of the state in the Senate, not directly from the people. It was to be representation, a representative system in that regard. But one of the things that changed was this, in regard to that, and there's a little innocuous statement at the end of the 16th Amendment, was to take away the previous method by which the federal budget was financed. Primarily, we've talked about this before, we had levies, excise, luxury, tariffs, taxes, and those were the things that made up the federal budget. If they needed a budget of a certain level and could not meet that level with these existing taxes, then they would dun the states based on their population. And those states would send money to the federal budget, to the federal government to make up the budget. And so that's how it was done. And in the process, it kept a lot of pork barrel from happening, being put into the bills, and a ballooned federal budget as a result of it. If the House wanted something, but the representatives of the states could stop it in the Senate, the spending bills would start with the House, and then the Senate would yay or nay, and based on that thing back home where they knew that their legislature would have to make up the shortfall, and if they voted for pork barrel things, that legislature would pull them on the carpet and say, look, we are not going to elect you again because you are voting for pork barrel things, things that are unconstitutional, things that are not necessary. It's not directly to the people. You can fool a lot of the people to vote for representatives, but you're dealing with state legislators when you're dealing with electing senators under the old system. A lot more astute politically, so on and so forth. What happened once these two amendments were put into play was a complete reversal of the financing of the federal government and the financing of the state governments. Do you know that some state governments have as much as 2/3 of their budgets coming from the federal government? I think there's no state that has less than 1/3 of the state budget that's financed from the federal government. And so a complete reversal. They've taken away the check and balance of that money coming from the state to make up for the budget, to where they've created a trough instead for the state governments. And so the state governments are very reluctant to do anything in the way of nullification and that sort of thing to make enemies there at the Treasury Department. It was just that simple. And that's what happened with the 16th and 17th Amendment. In order to balance the budget, we don't need a new amendment. What we need to do is to get rid of two amendments that change the very nature of the Constitution and get back to what our forefathers gave us in the way of checks and balances. So why is there so much effort for a balanced budget amendment that does not take this into consideration, that does not educate the American voter and even the legislators, who some of them don't even understand these things anymore? It's been lost from their lessons in school, and not all of them are lawyers, and even some of them who are lawyers, as I said, are lawyers with case law attitude rather than a constitutional attitude. So there's something afoot with all of this, with them wanting to have amendments added to the Constitution that will further be a problem relative to constitutional law instead of case law. One more item on this balanced budget amendment. With the 16th and 17th Amendment still in place, and adding on top of that a balanced budget amendment, you're going to see something very untenable happen to the citizens of the United States and our economy. Because if they're going to balance the budget, how are they going to do it? They're going to do it by taxing people more. It is that simple. And they've got the mechanism right there in place, instead of getting rid of the mechanism which could balance the budget. With the 16th and 17th Amendment still in place, contemplate what they could do with a balanced budget by taxing the American people, taxing the American businesses. We already have the highest corporate tax in the world over business. And this is the kind of thing that really bothers me. Now, I got this from the Boise newspaper, and let me read you just one short paragraph in here. The title of the article is "Third Time's a Charm for Gun Bill," and what they're talking about is revising the concealed carry bill, the law rather, in Idaho. Now get this. It says, state law today exempts officials of county, city, state of Idaho, and U.S. officials and all publicly elected officials from the requirement to have a permit to carry a concealed weapon. In other words, all the people in government can carry a concealed weapon, but you, Mr. Citizen, you have to come to government and ask permission. Now, with that kind of attitude, with that kind of law being passed in a conservative state, then you have to ask yourself the question, are these people really qualified to take a look at whether or not we need another convention, regardless of what you call it, to look at the Second Amendment and the Bill of Rights and that sort of thing all over again? You may say, well, that's a big leap. But there are those behind the con who want to rewrite the Second Amendment to the Constitution. And so here you've got this attitude being shown here, which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is no different fundamentally than the attitude of the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany, where government could carry guns, but the people could not. You had to come to the government and ask permission. And that's the sort of thing that's been going on. One last thing I think that I'll deal with is, this is from this morning's Wall Street Journal, far right flocks to Russia. We are seeing more and more of a dangerous precedence where the Putin government, all these so-called ex-KGB officers running the government, are catering to various right-wing organizations in the Western Hemisphere, even to the point of the secessionist movements and freedom movements inside the United States, trying to convince them that they're more fair than Washington, D.C. They're both unfair. And don't get caught up on false solutions as to whether Obama's better or Putin's better. They're both bad. Don't jump from the frying pan into the fire. That's one of the false solutions that they're trying to present to us. I was hoping I could get to another one regarding banking. Maybe I'll do it next week. Until then, we'll see you then.